For those watching from home, the FY16 audit that Mr. Wadman is referring to, you can find online at hamdenmaine.gov/budget, and it's the top link on that page.
And what we have here is some budget versus actual reporting on revenues for this past year, expenses, and your unassigned fund balance or your surplus for the year. The town ended this fiscal year with an unassigned fund balance of $1,015,082, or your surplus for the year. That was an increase of $388,617. And that is basically a result of three components. You had a revenue surplus for this past year, which is detailed on pages 42 and 43. The results of your revenue activity for this past year was a favorable budget variance. In other words, revenues in excess of budget of $281,573. On the expenditure side, you operated $422,044 below budget. So that is a combined favorable budget variance for the town for this past fiscal year of $703,617. Now, in putting your budget together for the year ended June 30th, 2016, you used $315,000 of your surplus to reduce your tax commitment for the year. So that subtracted from your $703,617 resulted in a favorable increase in your surplus for the year of $388,617, again ending at that $1,015,082. Aside from that, very strong year for you financially. Enjoyed doing your audit. We had no management letter comments for this past fiscal year, no written internal control weaknesses, anything to that effect. And that's all I have for you. If you have any other questions, I know we talked about in more detail earlier a number of various items, but try to keep it brief. And
just a simple comment that as both a resident of this community and a counselor, it's a reinforcing feeling of security to know that we've hired a good town manager who works with capable staff, and then you get that sense verified by an independent audit. It's a very comfortable position to be in.
One point of clarification that I think would be helpful to make clear for the public. So, as you know, the sewer fund has run a deficit for a number of years and has paid its bills by virtue of borrowing from the general fund through so-called interfund transfers. So when people hear $1 million fund balance, I just want people to understand that there's not $1 million sitting in the bank that we can just go work with, that some significant share of that is actually funds that are due to the general fund from the sewer, that is part of the assets that shows up on our balance sheet. So until the sewer fund actually pays back the general fund in full, that money's not actually in the bank. It is an asset because it's owed to us. But if you could just clarify that point.
well, that's true. Your assets consist not only of cash and investments, but you have approximately $615,000 owed to your general fund from your wastewater fund. You also have other receivables from other governments. You have receivables in the form of property taxes and tax liens. So this surplus of $1,015,000 is not necessarily money sitting in the bank. It needs to be collected from various sources as well.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Appreciate it. This time the town manager will present the proposed FY18 budget for the town of Hamden. Town Manager Jennings.
All right, thank you very much. And before I get into the brief PowerPoint presentation, I'm just going to illustrate for the council what you have in front of you. This is a hard copy binder of the budget. This was in response to suggestions from councilors following on last year's process that having a physical binder would be helpful. So this is actually going to affect how we're going to go about the process over the course of the next roughly 6 weeks of the budget process. So as we get into the different working meetings, you can expect that if we have new information that's additional backup for some of these topics, we'll provide it to you in 3-hole punch form. So please bring your binders to every working session. And for those who don't have a hard copy binder, all of this information has not yet been posted, but it will be posted first thing tomorrow morning to the Town of Hamden website, which is hamdenmaine.gov/budget. So getting back to the binder, you have, last year I presented a single budget that included general fund, sewer fund, and the capital program. What we've done this year is to present 3 separate documents because they really do stand alone. So you have your proposed sewer budget, which includes the proposed sewer capital program. So only those infrastructure items that would be paid out of ratepayers rather than taxation. Then in the front page of your binder, you have the list of budget working meetings. The council back in, I believe, February, perhaps early March, had approved this list. So we have posted this. It has actually been posted going back probably 6 weeks or more. And we're going to continue to just really promote to the public the many working sessions coming up. And I'll make this point again at the end of the presentation, but I know I speak for the council when I say that public participation in this process is strongly encouraged. And the working sessions are not this type of format. They're much more informal. We'll be sitting around a table, and I think if people show up and want to engage in the process, they'll find that you can certainly have a voice. Then the next page is you've got kind of at a glance a summary of the entire general fund budget, and then you've got tabs breaking down for each department or each cost category. You have the FY16 budgeted number, FY16 actual, FY17 budgeted, FY17 year-to-date. And then you've got the next column is the percentage, and at the time that we ran these numbers, it was April 25th, which was exactly 81.9% through the fiscal year. So under those percentages, you'll see that some are highlighted or shaded. That's just a formula that automatically shades any number that is more than 81.9%. So if your expenses are trending over, or if your revenues are even better, trending over projections, that's what that indicator is of that highlighted box. Then you've got the next column, FY18 Town Manager. That's my recommended budget amount. That's got the 2 bars on either side, and the change from FY17 to 18 in dollar figures. If it's a regular number, that's an increase. If it's a number in parentheses, that's a proposed decrease. So now that we've got that out of the way, I will give kind of an overview and set the table for the meetings to come in the next weeks. So I'm going to start just with longer-term budget and financial trends, speak to the budget process that's happened so far to date. I already gave an overview. You've got proposed expense budget, projected revenue budget, you've got a sewer budget, and you've got a 5-year capital program, and we've batched that together with a proposed reserve allocation so that the proposed reserve funding is directly informed by the capital program. We did that last year, but I think this year you'll find it's brought together a little bit more succinctly. And budget work sessions begin this Wednesday at 7 p.m. And I should say that all of these elements of the budget are direct from the town charter. So some of the budget changes from prior years, we heard about this a bit with the audit presented earlier tonight, but over the course of the last many years, it had become annual draw from fund balance in order to reduce the amount that needed to be raised by taxation. In fact, in the 10 years prior to FY17, the town drew just over $4 million over 10 years from fund balance. You see some of those numbers there for the last 6 years. The current FY17 budget did not rely on any draw from unassigned balance or from reserves in order to meet the revenue targets. The current year budget did also incorporate items that were previously paid from one-time revenues, namely the Host Community Benefit Fund. We incorporated those into the expense budget, so what we have in this current year that we're living right now is an accurate budget of what the costs are. That included also things like stormwater management, which has become a pretty significant expense, as well as some items that are not big dollar items, but which had not been specifically budgeted, such as Veterans Day and Christmas light decorations. The FY17 budget did include some one-time revenues, namely the environmental trust. Overall budget trends, a greater percentage of the property tax dollar has gone toward the school and the county over the last 8 or 9 years. The municipal percentage of property tax revenue has steadily decreased, though it did increase in FY17. So from FY09 to FY17, the town's budget went up over those, in the aggregate, over those 8 budget cycles by 3.4%. At the same time, the RSU budget went up by 25.6%. Looking at the RSU budget that's proposed for FY18, that's obviously a major ingredient of our budget. And we just got those numbers for the first time this past Tuesday, so just 6 days ago. So it's been a bit of a scramble to rejigger some of our numbers based on what we heard. But there is a proposed, the gross budget increase proposed by RSU 22 is 2.54%. However, because of the sources of funding and because of projected reduced state revenue, state aid to education, that would fall much more heavily on Hamden. Specifically, it would be about 4.1% increase on the Hamden share of that overall budget. So I took a look at the 10 cost centers, which by statute is how the RSU budget has to be broken down. What you can see here in the bar chart is the proposed FY18 budget for RSU 22. What you see in the line graph that overlays that is the percentage change from FY17 to FY18. So just to take one example, system administration represents a relatively small share of the overall school budget, but is proposed to increase by 10.8% from FY17 to 18. Now, some of this, I believe, is a result of RSU board trying to budget more like we had asked them to do a year ago, of actually budgeting where the expenses are, rather than so-called contingency budgeting. So while some of these changes may appear significant, I think without digging really deep, because we just got this last Tuesday, but I do think this is actually a good faith effort on their part to budget more clearly on where the expenses are going. With that said, of course, we'll continue to dig into those details, and the next meeting of the RSU Budget and Finance Committee is tomorrow night at 6 o'clock at Hamden Academy, and I'll be there for that. So the approved budget in FY17, this breaks down, shows pretty clearly where the costs go. Public Works is the largest, followed by police, fire, administration, non-department utilities, which is things like the water district primarily, as well as street light, electricity comes out of there. Then we get into reserves, solid waste, debt service, and then we get more into some of the departments, planning, assessing, library, pool, buildings and grounds, and so forth. The top costs in the town budget, leaving aside obviously school and county, roughly 65% of the budget's tied up in compensation. That's salaries, wages, health insurance, retirement, Medicare, workers' comp, group insurance, life insurance, and dental. So that's fully just about 2/3 of the budget. Utilities and fuel are the second largest expense. I've included in that the hydrant rental, which is what we pay to the water district, fuel, electricity, telephone, internet, water, and sewer. Reserve funds and debt service have been about 5% apiece, solid waste 4%, and everything else comprises about 16%. Now, this does not factor in offsetting fees or revenues. This is just on the expense side. So due to last year, fiscal 16 spending being somewhat below budget and in some cases revenues being above budget, most notably excise tax, which exceeded projections in FY16 by over $300,000, the unassigned fund balance did increase in the FY16 audit, as we heard earlier tonight. Now, I will say they gave a percentage of 8.6%. My math comes to 8.8%. I assume that they're correct on that, and I'll figure out what I did wrong. But the point is, it was down to 7.4, and now it's back to 8.6. So we're heading the right direction there. So this, I already kind of spoke to this, but this is what you'll see in your budget workbook, and I just wanted to illustrate. So you've got the line item, you've got a brief description of what that covers. In some cases, and this just happens to be the municipal building one as an example, in some cases we've put the actual amounts. For instance, if we have a contract for service and we know exactly what it's going to be, we actually put that in so we know we're keeping things as lean as possible. In other cases, it's more general depending on the nature of the expense. And I already walked through, but now that people have it in front of you, you've got FY16 budget, FY16 actual, FY17 budget, FY17 year-to-date, the percentage year-to-date, and those that are in excess of where we were on the calendar are shaded in pink or orange. You've got what I'm recommending in this year and then the change. And I have added a note section. So, for example, for electricity and fuel, I still have not locked in prices for next year. I'm still looking at options on that. So I've put that in red just so it's very clear as you're reviewing that that number could change. Other numbers could change too, but where I know something is going to change, I've tried to make that obvious. So where we are in the process, we had the goal setting back in February. In March and April, department heads provided their budgets to me, and I've been trying to pull all that together, as well as obviously county and school. Tonight is the kind of formal kickoff of the budget consideration. And throughout the month of May, we've got 6 different budget working meetings scheduled. The council reserves the right to schedule additional meetings, but we know there will be at least 6, and those are broken down by category. May 15th, the council did refer the fee ordinance to public hearing, so they will take a close look at sewer rates on May 15th. And on June 5th, that's the anticipated date that the council would refer their own budget to public hearing. What you have before you is my budget, that's your budget. So by that point, you need to get this to where there's hopefully a strong majority, if not unanimous, that would consider referring a budget. And June 19th is the date of the anticipated budget public hearing, and by the way, under the town charter, it cannot be any later than that. Some changes from prior years. The sewer budget includes proposed revenues and costs, but as I said earlier, the capital program, I've built it right into the sewer budget to keep that as fully segregated as possible. The sewer fund was self-supporting this fiscal year for the first time in probably 15 years. But that was based on a roughly 7-year payback of the interfund transfers. So that's one of the issues the council will look at the rate hearing. There have also been new capital obligations taken on in the sewer since that budget was approved last June. And one additional change from prior years is, I mentioned about the host community benefit account, are budgeted in this budget as they were in the current FY17. One significant change that you see is we've gone away from this enterprise or quasi-enterprise budgeting for recreation and pool. They are both proposed with standard budgeting. What that means is that the expense side of the budget is going to be significantly more than what you saw last year. But it also brings the projected rec and pool revenues onto the revenue side of the budget. So you just need to flip back and forth pages if you want to get to, kind of a true cost for those programs. Whereas last year that was all done internally, and neither the expenses nor the revenues were reported in the budget presentation. They were reported to this council, they were considered in public hearing, and they were voted. but they were literally a separate document. So now it's all woven in together. There are some proposed staffing changes in what you have before you. We currently have an administrative position that is split 75-25% between Public Works and Administration. I'm proposing to change that 100% to Public Works. I feel our Public Works department really needs a dedicated full-time administrative support. That does rely on my office taking over both payroll and ambulance billing and collections. I'm continuing to work with job descriptions and see how that can shake out, but the concept, that's what's before you. DPW is proposing a town engineer. The position title he's used as assistant director, as well as dedicated sewer personnel. There is a proposal before you to restore a third full-time position to the Recreation Department. This position has not been filled since the fall of 2015. And finally, Chief Rogers has brought forward proposed addition of one firefighter and one police officer. He and I have met and talked this over in detail. He's given a very articulate basis for this, similar to what he presented at the goal setting back in February. Those positions are not reflected in what you have before you. So if either or both of those positions are added, it would change what you have in front of you. I felt that really all of these are big decisions that ultimately are the council's decision, but for those two in particular, there's a fair amount of complexity. I've also asked Chief Rogers to go back to to recalculate some numbers on overtime, because in either or both of these instances, I believe adding a new full-time person would result in reduced payment of overtime, where, for instance, we have a dedicated police officer paid in overtime for all but the summer months. So he's taken a closer look at those overtime budgeted numbers.
As far as ambulance billing and collections, could that be done by someone in Chief Rogers' department? They have an administrative person there, correct?
He's got just one administrative person for police, fire, and ambulance. So I think it would be a tall order. Tammy Ewing, our finance and HR, she did ambulance billing when she started early on, and she tells me she thinks we can absorb it within the current staffing, and it won't be a huge lift. Obviously, between now and the vote of the budget in about 6 weeks, I need to firm up those details, but I kind of think we can do it. On payroll, we have looked at outsourcing that. We've also looked at keeping that in-house, and I'm still weighing those options. So that'll continue to tighten up.
Thank you.
Some factors affecting FY18 costs. I am budgeting for a 12% increase in healthcare costs. This is, it's kind of a moving target, but when you look at the year-to-date spending on health insurance, last year we expected a 10% increase would take effect as of January 1st. So understanding that would apply to half of the fiscal year, we budgeted a 5% increase in health insurance. When you look at where we are spending year-to-date, we're on track to overspend in health insurance. So I think I slightly under-budgeted what I should have last year on health. So partly to make up for that, I'm proposing a more significant increase. In the materials we've received, they've estimated between 10 and 15% based on the plan that we offer. Again, that would take effect January 1st of 2018, so there is kind of an educated guess involved to come up with your best possible estimate, but that's what you have in there is a 0.12 addition to this year's budget. We're budgeting a 3% increase in our property and casualty insurance and dental. The town share of RSU 22 is proposed to increase 4.1%. County tax is already set. That's going to increase by 5.3%. As I mentioned earlier, I have not locked in pricing for heating oil, propane, and diesel. I'm still evaluating the best options, as well as looking at electricity rates. One of the operational factors for FY18, the change from PERC to MRC for handling our solid waste. There are some kind of back office things we need to think about. I have proposed $10,000 in contingency budgeting in case the facility is not up and running on time. We're aiming for April 1st of 2018. That leaves April, May, June, the fourth quarter of FY18, as potentially in play. What I've done is propose $10,000, which is about what we think the trucking cost could be. I think that's a worst-case scenario, and what I've done is propose that to go into the Solid Waste Reserve Fund. That way, if we need it, it's there, subject to council approval. If we don't need it, it remains in that reserve fund for other solid waste reasons. That way, it's not an increase in the operating budget. We are going to lose the PERC rebates for the fourth quarter of FY18. However, we have a pretty firm number from MRC of what we will receive. It's going to be about $53,000, so we'll lose about $12,000 year over year on that. But this third point is a pretty important one, and you'll hear more about this on Wednesday at Planning and Development Committee. We have to enforce the solid waste flow control ordinance. This has been on the books for decades. As a practical matter, has not been enforced for a long time. So the ordinance has to be updated, and it is going to require some new administrative tasks, and I'm still trying to figure out where that will rest, whether that'll be my job, Public Works job, Paula's job. It's got to be someone's job, so we're looking at that. Some cost factors on the sewer. I mentioned earlier we've got the debt service for that's got to be built into the expense side. Potential need for additional borrowing regarding the Gristmill Bridge. That's the replacement, and the sewer fund's going to be responsible for replacing the force main and water main in that bridge. We do have a public hearing on May 15th. Some state changes in state policy. Municipal revenue sharing, I'm pleased to report, is projected to increase by about $16,000 from last year to this, or I should say from this year to next. It's still less than half of what it was just 7 or 8 years ago, so we're still well below what it had been for 50 years prior to that. So the legislature is still rating municipal revenue sharing, but at least it's going up this year, not down. There are changes to the Homestead Act that were adopted a couple of years ago. This will increase the exemption from $15,000 to $20,000, but it will also increase the state reimbursement from 50% to 62.5%. So I'm working with the assessor to determine or to estimate the Hamden impact. There are additional revenues proposed in this budget. I'm projecting the use of environmental trust revenues to offset budgeted stormwater management expenses. There's an expense line in the stormwater account of about $74,000. This would be subject to approval of the Environmental Trust Committee and this council. So their next meeting is on May 18th. I'll be talking with them about this proposal and see if they feel that should remain in there. But I think it makes a lot of sense given that the Environmental Trust income is eligible for purposes that improve our town's environment, which stormwater management is all about that. We are fortunate to have one-time revenues available in the Mayo Road bond, and so we are able to plug in $109,000 onto the revenue side. I've got our new tax collector, Barbara, doing some kind of deep auditing of why, but I will tell you our auditor this has been on the books for 4 or 5 years. They told me and Tammy about it last fall, and she said, oh, you've got $109,000, you can spend this. I said, we're really not in a spending mode, but thank you. I now understand that it's actually sitting there, needs to be spent, and so what we think happened, and actually maybe someone knows, is they estimated the Mayo Road expense here. The actual cost came in somewhat less. So even after they had done the whole project, paid all of the bills, there was money that was borrowed that's sitting in the bank. So that $109,000, and I confirmed 3 different ways with the auditor, we can use that to pay the debt service on that Mayo Road bond next year. It won't be there for FY19, but for next year it gives us a welcome piece of revenue. I am projecting an increase in excise taxes of about $110,000. I am proposing the use of limited reserve funds to offset budgeted expenses. That's, you remember from the goal setting, we have a number of accounts with some balances which can be put to use. Every dollar we spend out of those existing reserve funds is a dollar that does not need to be raised otherwise. And I am proposing a fund balance appropriation, which this is something that's, I'm kind of going back and forth on, but what you have before you is carrying $200,000 of fund balance. That may or may not survive the process, but it's in there now. Estimated real mill rate impact, it is way too soon to say. We don't know what the budget's going to end up on either expense or revenue side. The mill rate will not be established until the tax commitment, which will be in August. And it is certain that the budget proposed tonight will change as a result of several council budget work sessions in May. We also expect greater clarity as the RSU 22 budget process moves forward, and in particular, projections of state aid to education. They have projected what I believe is a conservative state aid to education. At a meeting we had earlier this year with Senator Cushing and Senator Thibodeau, Senator Thibodeau said 4 different times, state aid to education in FY18 will not go down from FY17. With that said, he said, this is what I believe, this is not what I know. So RSU is budgeting a smaller amount of state aid if the state ends up meeting his commitment and that additional revenue comes in. Depending on how that board manages that revenue, that could be used to reduce the local commitment to education. And those who were at last week's meeting, and there were actually 3 counselors there, know that the board voted a resolution which gives them 3 different options if they get more revenue from the state. The third being to reduce the local commitment. One of the points that I know my counterpart in Newburgh will make tomorrow night is that if they get more state aid to education, they should amend that resolution they voted last week to say with clarity that would be used to reduce the local commitment. So that's something that I know the council would join me in advocating that.
We were in a situation, I think probably 3 years ago, where they got extra aid, or we overpaid, and we didn't see a dime of it. So I think a resolution stating that it's coming back or will be used to offset would be a good one.
We actually went so far as to estimate the amount of increase in valuation that would be needed in order to absorb the projected budget increase from RSU 22, and holding all things equal, which you saw earlier in the presentation, they're not. We are seeing increased costs in a number of areas. If you held everything equal with the RSU budget going up as proposed, the town of Hamden's valuation would have to increase by just over $14 million from FY17 to FY18 just to absorb that increase at the current mill rate. So at that proposed increase, there really is no choice but to either cut services or raise taxes. So I made that point very clear to the school board budget and finance committees last Tuesday. I think they heard me, and we'll see what they do tomorrow night. So in conclusion, tonight is the formal kickoff of the budget process. The council will conduct at least 6 budget work sessions in May in addition to the sewer rate public hearing. We strongly encourage public involvement. All of the materials that you've heard tonight will be posted first thing tomorrow at hamdenmaine.gov/budget. And of course, you can stop by at any time and just ask us what's going on.